All right. Thank you for joining us, everyone. We'll get started in about one more minute. But first, I would love to go ahead and introduce myself and talk a little bit about foundations. So my name is Shanika Peck, and I'm one of the education specialists at the Center for After School and Expanded Learning at Foundations, Inc. So welcome to our Beyond the Conference webinar series. So today we have our guest, Hillary Jones from Foundations as well. And we'll be getting started shortly. Again, I'm going to give you a little background about Foundations. And in fact, I'll go ahead and add the link to our website in the chat. Just in case you don't know, we are a national education nonprofit located in Mount Laurel, New Jersey, and our mission is to improve the quality of education by building the skills of the educators. We work across the school day, the after-school program, school districts, and states to create a brighter future for every child every day. If you're interested in learning more about Foundations, you can also follow us on social media. I'll go ahead and drop that information in the chat as well. You may already know us from our signature professional learning experience, the Beyond School Hours Conference, which is held each year in February. And this upcoming conference in 2024 will be held in New Orleans from February 14th to the 17th. And we'd love to have you all be our guests. So if you're interested in coming, especially since the conference starts the day after Mardi Gras, we highly recommend booking your hotel and flights soon. So what I'll go ahead and do is go ahead and add those social media links. And now I'll introduce you to today's facilitator, Hillary Jones. Now, Hillary Jones, she is also an education specialist in the Center for After School and Expanded Learning. She's providing professional development, technical assistance, and content development to our clients nationwide. Hillary's career began as a teacher in the city of Camden, teaching Spanish, language arts, and literacy. And then shortly after, she transitioned into the after-school world. Now, what I'll do is I'll let Hillary go ahead and expand on her background before she gets started. And again, just so you know, this webinar will be archived to our website and YouTube, so you'll be able to access it later. So I'll go ahead and pass it over to our guest, Hillary.
Thanks, Shanika. I am excited to be here today and to be talking a little bit about demystifying out of school time terminology. And my hope is today that we can really look at some of this lingo that we use in out of school time programming, what it means for your practice as out of school time practitioners, and some practical approaches of what it looks like to implement this in your program. And then at the end, I have a tool for you that you can use to evaluate where your program stands as you begin to implement this in your own programs, in your own spaces. And so, as Shanika mentioned, I am part of the Center for After School and Expanded Learning, and we do all kinds of training and presentations, as well as evaluation and coaching and program content development. Personally, Shanika mentioned, I come from the school day background. And so I am getting to share some of the things that I learned in the school setting with all of you that then has become part of what we're talking about in out of school time. And I think it's important to make the connections between those things so that we can better understand and support our students in the spaces that they're in. You all are probably Zoom experts by now, but just for my mentions for today, we are going to use some annotation features, as well as please chat with us in the chat box. Please respond and interact with us. We know that you have a lot going on and may just have your ear tuned into this, but we would love to have each of you share with us as we have conversation today, because it's important to have those conversations with other professionals to begin to grow and develop what's happening in your program. So today we're going to talk about these 4 hot topic terms in the out of school field, things that people are talking about. But out of school time really means a wide variety of things for all of us. And so for our purposes today, when I say out of school time, I'm really talking about any time outside of school hours when students aren't in school. So this can be before school, it can be after school, it can be in the evening, what I like to call after school, that 7, 8 o'clock hour, and summer. And so I want you to think about all of those times and what you're doing. So I'd like to open by hearing a little bit from you, and I want you to tell us about your program. So I have on the screen 4 key components that many out-of-school programs are saying, this is what we do. We do academic support or health and wellness, enrichment, or childcare. And I'd like you to grab that annotation tool and use it to mark for us on these boxes, what are the things that you're doing, that your program is doing in the out-of-school time context. And if there's something that you're doing that isn't represented in these 4 pretty broad categories, please add them in the chat box. We want to hear what you're doing, what it is that you're bringing to the out of school time field for your young people. So I see we've got a couple of people doing some enrichment, some academic support, and those are some great starting places. It could be that you're doing some health and wellness, whether that's social, emotional, or that's physical health and wellness. That can look like sports teams and other co-curriculars. For some of you, it may mean that you're doing childcare. When I was running programs, that was a big one. Parents needed somewhere safe for their children to go after school while they were still working. And that's an important part of what we're overall doing. We've got some leadership, we've got some nutrition education. That's great. So as you continue to just drop in what you're doing, we'd love to hear that from you. But no matter what it is you're doing in your program, these strategies that we talk about today can increase the effectiveness of your overall program. And so the terms that we're going to talk about today are, apologize, I got to get rid of our stars, are developmentally appropriate practices, evidence-based practices, aligned with the school day, and multi-tiered systems of support. And those are kind of these 4 terms that, at least in the spaces that I'm in and out of school time right now, get thrown around a lot. We're talking about them. But as out of school time educators, especially if you don't have a background in the school day, you may not have the context for them. And even if you do, you may not have heard these terms as they're coming up more and more. They're kind of these hot topics. And so let's start with the first one. So the first one is developmentally appropriate practices. And this is the space where teachers and staff base all of their practices and decisions with the goal of nurturing students' social, emotional, physical, and cognitive development. And oftentimes it's a space that's talked about primarily for our youngest learners, but really what is emerging is that we need to be talking about developmentally appropriate practices throughout the continuum of ages as students grow and get older. And these developmentally appropriate practices are ones that are grounded in research and how children learn and develop. Because oftentimes we're not looking closely at that as we develop and implement our learning spaces. So we're going to look at these a little bit more, but if you're interested in learning a little bit more about research around developmentally appropriate practices, I'll encourage you to take a look at Safe Supportive learning.ed.gov is a website that the federal government has put together some information around these practices. And one of the things that they would say is developmentally appropriate practices have 3 key components to them. The first is that all domains of development, the cognitive, the physical, the social, and emotional, are interrelated. They're all connected. And so these experiences in one domain influence development in another. Developmentally appropriate practices, sometimes called DAP, D-A-P, entails planning and delivering educational content and supports that cover all the domains and areas of development. And I suspect that many of you as out of school time professionals really are already working to do that. Give us your little hand up if you think, yep, I'm doing that already. And so we want our programs, we need our programs to be spaces where we're fostering those confidence and skills that support this developmental relationship. There's some hands. These developmental relationships with both adults and peers, and setting them up for their subsequent years as they grow and develop. And similarly, the failure to develop these basic social skills in our students may mean that our children have long-term challenges in interacting with their peers, or are more likely to experience negative outcomes such as dropping out of school, such as delinquency, such as mental health challenges. And so it's really important that we're working early on to build out appropriate supports for all of these domains, that we can't say, well, we don't have time for one component or the other, because they're all interacting and they're creating these challenges for our students. So let's look at an example. And so we're going to watch a video where this student, who her name is Kendall, describes herself and her difficulties with attention. And as we watch it, I want you to think about, how could the domains of development, the cognitive, the physical, the social and emotional, be affected by her ability to focus and her difficulty focusing? And so as I show this video, I want you to think about that question, and then I'm going to ask you to share your responses in the chat box.
My name is Kendall. I'm in the 4th grade, and paying attention is a big struggle for me. It feels like one side of my body is fighting with the other side. When you're trying to learn about verbs or division, my hands like start shaking. You can feel your body like wanting to get up. I like push my chair back and then just start going everywhere. Some friends are like, "You're weird, Kendall," or "You're really crazy," and so and they're just joking around. And sometimes they're not. Sometimes I kick the bottom of my friend's chair and I'm like, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that," and I try to control it.
So that's all Kendall has for us. But for all of you, my question is, how could the domains of development, the cognitive, the physical, and the social emotional, be affected by her difficulty focusing? So take a minute, write some ideas, some things that you're thinking of in the chat. I'll say, or if you're brave and you just want to unmute, you're welcome to do that too, but we'd love to hear what you're thinking, how one area is impacting the other areas.
Is that all right to speak out?
Yeah, please.
Oh, okay, great. I'm Loretta Curry from Life Pieces to Masterpieces, and viewing Kendall in the video, I'm not a psychologist or whatever, but I definitely would think that she has definitely a social, something that's gone, I'm sorry, emotional, something that's going on there, definitely emotionally. And then to try to tap in to see, what's happening there. Cognitive, I'm not quite sure. I don't think I got enough information to say, but emotionally for her, just reacting in the way that she was, I think there's something going on there. So it will affect her probably in all the other different areas.
Absolutely. So I think that's exactly a piece of it, right? That there's that social emotional, she says her friends describe her as weird or crazy. And she knows that her friends aren't doing the same thing, like Crystal's saying in the chat. So there's this conflict between her body and what her body's doing, and then the social aspects of it. And that creates a space for challenge. But I think there's a cognitive piece there too. And Loretta, you'll tell me if that makes sense. So the cognitive pieces, she's supposed to be learning about verbs or division or whatever it is, right? Those were her examples. And while that's happening, while that instruction's happening in the classroom or in her program, that what's happening is that she's being affected by her body, right? Her hands are shaking and she gets up out of her chair and moves around the room. That's what she describes herself as doing. And so that starts to have impact on the cognitive learning that should be happening, and the physical is impacting it, and the social emotional pieces are all kind of connected there. And that's the piece that developmentally appropriate practices is telling us, that those pieces are all connected. One impacts the other, impacts the other. Exactly, Crystal, that she's got all this going on in her brain, she may not be getting all of the lesson. And so that's the first piece of developmentally appropriate practices. We don't need to watch it again. The second piece is that that developmentally appropriate practices are synonymous with a positive program climate. This is the space where students get both positive relationships and emotional and physical safety at the program. So very young children, they're going to thrive, they're going to become more engaged, they're going to have a positive learning experience because of the climate that you create in your out of school time program. And all students, but particularly these young children that these developmentally appropriate practices are talking about, learn best when their education is provided in an environment that's both physically safe and emotionally safe. So I'm talking about that safety from violence, from exposure to weapons or threats, and illegal substances, right? Some physical safety issues, but then also this emotional safety where they have opportunities to express a whole range of feelings and behaviors, and then receive appropriate guidance and supports to learn those social skills, to learn how to manage themselves. And by providing a safe, supportive environment for students, basic needs, they can continue to learn and grow effectively. Some of you may be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy as one way to understand this. And so our students have physiological needs that you see down at the bottom of this pyramid of food and shelter. We need them when they come to our programs not to be hungry. We need them to feel like they have their basic needs met. And then they need to have safety and security needs. They need to have physical safety. I mentioned some examples, but also that emotional safety, a safe space, the supportive environment where they feel loved, where they belong, so that they can continue to learn and grow. And so when they have these things, we're creating this positive program climate for our students. And so when you think about your program climate and what it's like, one of the things that program climate that we use to talk about program climate is, what do you want to see? What do you want to hear? And what do you want to feel when you enter your program? And what do you want your students to see, hear, and feel? What do you want your staff to see, hear, and feel? What do you want families to see, hear, and feel when they enter your program? So I'm going to pose that question to you. Just generally, what would you want to see, hear, and feel in your program? What is a positive program climate for you? Go ahead, share some things in the chat box. They don't have to be deep things, right? They can be, I want to hear people call each other by name, staff greeting parents by name, staff and students calling each other by name. That demonstrates some level of connection and relationship.
So, you know what? I am so slow, and I don't know if we have younger people on here or whatever. I am slow at typing in the chat.
That's okay, go for it.
So I'm just going to quickly go for it. So definitely when in our environment, so it's see, hear, feel, and smell, because and it's part of what I see, hear, feel, and smell when I was at home. So in our environment, we want them to have a sense of all of those things, the physiological, the safety, and all of that. Like a home should be. Not all of them come from homes that have that type of environment, but the environment that I had growing up was all of those things, met all of those needs. And that's what we try to give our boys that enter our program that feeling like we felt when we were safe and secure at home, having all of our needs met. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And there's lots of other great answers here, right? Evidence of creativity, of working together, of that collaborative spirit, of engagement, right? Hands-on, brains-on kind of participation, no safety hazards, obviously, but also that welcoming, fun, exciting piece, some high fives, some warm welcomes, right? An open door policy, those spaces for families. And so one of the things that you can do if you want to look at what is going on with your developmentally appropriate practices is think about these things for yourself. What are the things that I want to see, hear, and feel when I come into the program space? And then think about in turn, am I seeing, hearing, feeling those things? So use that almost like a checklist for yourself when you walk into your program door. Is that's what's happening? Use it as a tool to evaluate your own program as you observe what's happening. The third piece of this developmentally appropriate practices is it's not a curriculum. And we don't need another curriculum in our programs. Oftentimes we've got a lot that we're trying to cram into not very much time. Developmentally appropriate practices is an approach like the concept of safe, supportive learning. It's how we approach everything that we do. And in its simplest form, it requires that we understand child development, that we plan thoughtfully, but it's an approach where we demonstrate this responsiveness to our individual students' behavior, their culture, their language, as we make plans and as we make decisions for our students. And when we use developmentally appropriate practices, it creates a positive climate in our programs, and it strengthens this partnership with families. It makes sure our children are seen for their unique potential. And it really lays the foundation for increasing their academic achievement, if that's one of your goals, and other achievement in other areas if those are your goals. And so one example is this, that developmentally appropriate practices sometimes have to be very specific to a specific student because every student develops differently, and we know that. And so I think of an example where I had a student in my program who he really struggled with communication generally. That was a challenge for him, but it especially was a problem when he was escalated, when he was upset or frustrated. And what he really needed was that when he was upset and frustrated, he needed to be able to interact with somebody who spoke the same first language as him. Because if he worked with somebody who was just an English speaker, he was going to end up more frustrated than when he sat down with myself or another one of the Spanish speakers that we could communicate in a language that was best able to assist him and help him. And yes, some of our goals were around him developing his English language skills, but in that moment, in that space, the practice that helped him grow and develop those skills of the social, emotional, and self-management were using the language that best supported him. And so it's thinking like that to help build spaces for our students that are developmentally appropriate. Okay, so that's number one. Term number two is evidence-based practices. Okay, so evidence-based practices are skills, techniques, strategies that we're using in our programs that are proven to work through experimental research studies or large-scale research field studies. And that's specific, and I will talk a little bit more about those experimental research studies in a moment for you. And the reason that it's important to use evidence-based practices is many of us, and I put myself in the many of us, we use these well-established, commonly used practices and strategies. We've seen other people use them. We take ideas from other people that we think these are working, but sometimes those strategies we're using are not supported by evidence. And so that's an important thing for us to consider as out-of-school time professionals is, are we using evidence-based practices? And so evidence-based practices are things that can be difficult to identify for many of us. There can be a lack of opportunities and access to them or access to learn about them, right? There may not be professional development around them, or there's limited professional journals around out of school time, and really just limited publications around out of school time in general. Information about a specific evidence-based practice could be difficult to locate. It can be hard to find out whether the practices that we're talking about are really ones that are effective. And sometimes the information is rather inaccessible. So you may find a 50-page research article about a practice, but most of us are looking for something that we can flip through quickly and say, is this going to work or is it not? Some of the other challenges are that written descriptions may claim that practices are evidence-based, especially when the person who's selling the product says this is evidence-based, but there's not that rigorous research to go with it. And the term evidence-based really can vary depending on the organization and what they're talking about. And so it's important for us to come to talking about evidence-based practices with that understanding. And then one of the things that I want us to do is look at what we mean, what we're talking about when we're talking about evidence-based practices. And so evidence-based practices are evidence of this positive effect on student outcomes, that we know it works. And here's how we know it works. It's because the design of the research study lets us know that that specific practice led to the improvement of the students. Oftentimes, we look at programs and we say, okay, well, we're doing a lot of things and our students are improving, but we don't know what the things are that are improving it. This type of research that brings out these evidence-based practices, we can see that it is that practice that brings it out because it's the only thing that got changed in what the students are receiving. Evidence-based practices also have multiple high-quality studies that promote what they're doing, and they're reviewed by a reputable organization. I am going to share the link to 2 organizations that you can use to look at the evidence-based practices that I'm talking about. One is the What Works Clearinghouse, and the other one is bestevidence.org. These both look at practices and say, here is what we have to say about them. Now, it's important to know that for many skills and many behaviors that we need to run our programs, there's no evidence-based practice identified. Okay, they don't always exist. So it's also important to understand that there's other types of practices that you may want to consider. So the first one I'm going to look at is these promising practices. These are practices that are shown to have a positive effect on student outcomes, but the design of any research around them doesn't necessarily demonstrate that the practice itself is what led to the improvement. And there's some studies that have been conducted, but there's really a need for more research around it. The second one is research-based practices. So this is where there are some research studies that show that there's a positive effect on the outcomes for the children who've experienced these practices. And the research may or may not demonstrate that the students are improving. So there's lots of research studies, perhaps there's multiple studies anyway, and some show a positive effect, but others may not show that same positive effect. And so there's still some question mark out there, but there is research around it. And then the last one is an emerging practice. Sometimes we have to rely on this anecdotal evidence that the program or what we're doing is going to be effective, that there's not that research there yet. And sometimes that's as good as it gets. And the hope is that researchers and those who are doing that work are headed towards pulling those new practices into a place where they're research-based, where they're promising practices, and eventually where we can see whether they really are evidence-based practices. So I just threw a whole lot of information at you. And I want to show you a little bit about what this would look like in your program. And so I'm going to introduce an out-of-school program to you. And I'm going to tell you about 2 products that the director researched. And I want you to use your annotation tool as you listen to select the one that you would select, taking into consideration this program director's program, what we know about the program, which I'll tell you in a moment, and what I've just shared about evidence-based practices. So I want you to think about which one you would select and why. So Miss McAdory, she runs an after-school program for 3rd through 5th graders, and it's an urban community. And she's concerned about the reading comprehension skills of a number of her students, including some with disabilities and some English language learners. She wants to find evidence-based practice that addresses this issue. And so she visits several websites of trusted organizations, and she learns about 2 specific program options. So the first is she learns about peer-assisted learning strategies. And this is a combination of peer tutoring and instructional practices where the teacher pairs each student who has difficulty with specific skills with a student who can help the struggling student with the skills. It's been evaluated for 2nd through 6th graders, and it's been used with students with learning disabilities and English language learners, as well as struggling learners in a variety of contexts and places. One of the challenges or the concerns about the program is that it's going to cost about $2,500 to implement this program, to get the materials, and to attend the training workshop. So that's the first one, that's peer-assisted learning strategies. The second program that she looks at is cooperative integrated reading and composition. Okay? And this gets abbreviated CIRC. So CIRC combines direct instruction in reading comprehension and story-related activities. So there's actual teaching associated with it. And then students are paired together and assigned to a larger cooperative learning group. And this is students at the same level. It's been assessed for students in grades 1 through 6 in suburban and rural communities. And it's been assessed on students that are ethnically diverse, as well as some disadvantaged students, but not necessarily on students with disabilities or English language learners. It's only been used in a general education class. It's going to cost about $150 per student for training. So if she has more than 15, 16 students, it's going to cost about the same as the other option that had a more flat startup cost. So given all of that, I just gave you a lot of information. Think about Ms. McAdory and her program and let us know, what do you think? Do you think that she should be selecting peer-assisted learning strategies or cooperative integrated reading and composition? I'm sorry. And can you tell me why? Why did you pick that? So I'm getting some peer-assisted learning strategies. Right, so those peer-assisted learning strategies, those are the ones where students are working together. It's been assessed for English language learners, students with learning disabilities in grades 2 through 6. So there's some pieces there. We also have that cooperative integrated reading and composition. That's the other option, grades 1 through 4 in a variety of communities. But not necessarily the students with disabilities. Seeing a couple more of the PALS answer. as far as options go. So I'd love to hear from somebody, why are you thinking what you're thinking? What makes it important? What makes it relevant? If the budget permits, absolutely. So the budget is a piece, right? We know that we have to be able to pay for whatever we're picking as far as curriculum goes. And sometimes that's a real barrier to what we can access in out of school time. Budget could be a barrier. It does have the addressing students with disabilities, for sure.
And what I say, if I'm understanding correctly, is it more individual? It's kind of like maybe a one-on-one too also. I think that's part of the reason why I would choose it.
Yeah, you like them working together, right? These two
Yes.
students working in pairs together. I think
Yes.
I hear that. I think that's a really great out of school time strategy, right? We like to see students interacting together. I think on the other side, we've also got this cooperative integrated reading where they're working in pairs and then groups, but there's also some direct instruction from the adults, right? There's some direct, this is what I want you to learn, so it doesn't rely all on the students. And so I think that it's pretty open. And so I have an answer, because this is not a scenario I made up. This is a scenario that I borrowed. And Dr. Brian Cook, who is a professor of special education at the University of Hawaii, gave a response to the same question that I asked you. I'm going to share his response with you.
Sometimes when you're identifying or prioritizing an evidence-based practice, there's going to be only one evidence-based practice out there that is a good match with your learners and your resources. Sometimes there really will be just one clear answer. In a lot of cases, such as this one, I don't think there is one right answer. There aren't clear guidelines here about what aspects of the decision to prioritize over others. So is match with student characteristics more important than match with available resources? In some level, if you don't have the resources to participate in the training or to buy the curriculum or the products, you absolutely can't do it. So that kind of rules it out. Similarly, the level of evidence is really important. Even if something is a very good fit, if there's not evidence that it works well, I wouldn't select it. And so ultimately, I think it really depends, because we don't know the specific of Miss McAdory's situation. Does she have unlimited resources, which then opens up some different practices that may otherwise not be available to many teachers? What exactly are the characteristics and needs of her student, and how well does that match up? So some of the practices may be ruled out depending on the availability of resources to Miss McAdory. I'd really look at either PALS or CIRC as prioritized EBPs because of their higher rating from organizations like the What Works Clearinghouse in terms of their effectiveness. So I would probably look at those two practices, and once I knew more about Miss McAdory's classroom, her students, her resources, try to find which is the best fit for her.
And I think that's what many of you were saying, is that it's got to be the right fit, but it also has to be an evidence-based practice. If the evidence base doesn't match the students, then it's really hard to begin to have that conversation. And so I think you all are on the right track, and those of you who shared answers are headed in that direction. But that's what we're looking at when we look at evidence-based practices. So the next term for the day today is aligned with the school day. And this is that level of coordination between the school day and an out of school time program, whatever that looks like. And so together, the actions of what's happening in the school day ideally will highlight and confidently support the benefits of the students and what they need in the program. And so we are going to look a little bit about what I mean by aligned with the school day by looking at this model. So a program that's aligned with the school day has schools working towards their goals, and their goals may be dictated to them by their district. They're often dictated by their state and even federal directives. And so there's these school goals, but then there's also the student needs, right? They're the things that our students, we know they need. We know what's important to them. And oftentimes there's this gap between these student needs and these school goals. And the school can't help fill that gap. They've got to work towards their goals. Meanwhile, we have these needs that need to be addressed. Our out of school time programs, when our goals help fill those gaps, that's where we're aligned with the school. And so this can look like all kinds of things. It can look like we have students who need more physical activity or opportunities for creative expression because they're struggling with that. And so we have programs that support that gap. It may look like we have students who need evening meals, schools closed, and even if the school wants kids to be fed and not hungry, there's a gap there between the needs and the goals, and our programs may be filling that. Our school is supposed to be teaching academics, but we have students who, some of whom are way, way behind, and our programs may have goals to support academic, right? Those goals can look like all kinds of different things. They can fit into all of those categories that we mentioned earlier, but when our program goals help fill the gap between needs and school goals, we're aligned with the school day. And there's several areas where we can be aligned in. It's not just in the area of academics, right? It can be in the area of relationships. Are we having regular communication with, for example, the principal, right? A fall planning meeting, introductory communication with school staff, some program talking points. Are we connecting with those classroom teachers, for example, where we're talking about student goals or communicating about homework if that's something that you're assisting in? We can be aligned in the area of program and school policy, right? It could be an alignment with grant requirements and writing grants together, working together on it. It can be an alignment around we're both working to address an absenteeism issue, or we're using the same behavioral expectations. It can be an alignment of resources. It can mean that we're sharing physical space with a program, that we're working together to share materials and equipment. It may be that we're sharing curriculum or accessing the same online platforms. It could be a written agreement of collaboration. We could be aligning primarily around some student needs. If we're both working to address social emotional needs, or we're working together on family engagement. And then the last one is academics, right? Are we aligned around offering high quality academics, activities, lessons, resources? Are we collaborating around formative assessments or the curriculum maps and using those as a resource for us? All of those are areas where you can be aligned. Alignment is also important to think about as a continuum. You're not aligned or not aligned, and either you're doing it or you're not. It's not a checkbox, but instead it's a continuum. It's something that you can work to improve and do more alignment to better impact and support our students. And so you can think about it like this, that in the earliest stages of alignment, we're networking, right? We're exchanging information for mutual benefit. Maybe we're talking to teachers about students. Maybe we're checking on homework and what's done. Then you move to coordinating, right? This is where we start to blend what's happening together to meet a common purpose. And so if we know that the school is really struggling with homework completion, and picking on homework today, apparently, with homework completion, then are we working together to make sure that we're improving the homework that's cooperating then is the next step of it. This is where we really start to share resources, where we're working together. This could look like school day teachers supporting your programs. This could look like you sharing information and resources with the school. Perhaps you have a social worker that they can invite families to meet with, or some other type of resource that you're sharing. Then collaborating, this is really where you start to learn together in order to enhance both of your capacities. So when you're learning from the school and they're learning from you, because you both have your areas of expertise, that's really what collaboration looks like. And then integration is this complete merging of operations, structures, budgets. You're doing it together. And so instead of thinking about aligned, not aligned, I encourage you to think about, how can I move myself along the continuum? And not just how can I move myself along the continuum, but how can I move myself along the continuum in the area of alignment with the school day, of program and school policy, or resources, or student needs. So I have a poll for you that I'm going to launch, and it is a space to answer these questions. I want you to rate your current alignment in the area of, the first one's relationships. How are you doing in your relationships? Are you networking? Are you coordinating? Are you cooperating? Are you collaborating? Are you integrating? And then continue on and rate yourself in the area of school and program policy, of resources, of student needs, of academics, right? Continue on and take a few moments and think about it. How are you doing in each of these areas in your alignment with the school day, in the way you're connecting with them? Going to give everybody a few more minutes, another little bit to get, probably not minutes, but another little bit to get their answers in, and just think about this. But one of the things I'll say is everybody's in a different spot, right? And it may depend on the context of your program, right? You may be running a program that's hosted, run, and based in a school, or you may be running a karate studio that you're connected with a school in some way where most of your students come from that school, right? And so then those things are in very different places. And that's okay. That's the point of the continuum, is to be in a place where you're continuing to move along and continuing to make progress in that area. Okay, so you ready to see some results? Okay, so we've got some results here. And so for relationships, we had a really high response around collaborating together. Most of you are doing a really good job of learning from each other and building your capacity from it, not just sharing that information. Some of you are still in that networking stage. Some of you are integrating, right? You're there in the area of relationships. You are the same. Program and school policy kind of tended to be towards the networking, coordinating end of the continuum. And so that may be an area for some of you to look at a little more. Again, in resources was again a networking one very strongly here, right? That's the primary thing that we're doing, is we'll exchange information, but it hasn't necessarily been blended together. And sometimes that's a barrier of the funding sources that we talk about. Student needs, there looks like a lot of diversity of answers, some networking, coordinating, sharing information, but then others are more in the collaborating end, right? Where we're learning from each other and enhancing those opportunities. And then the last one was in the area of academics. We see that coordinating, integrating are stronger, and some of the others. And so I hope that as you look at those answers and that your colleagues shared, and you think about your own answers, you don't get discouraged. I hope what it actually says to you is, okay, I have a place to move forward. I have a place to finish this process and take a step in the right direction. And so that's one of the things to be thinking about as you walk away from this is, if I don't have strong alignment with the school day, how can I take a step to move from networking to coordinating, or coordinating to cooperating, or cooperating to collaborate, right? Taking a step along that process. Next word of the day is multi-tiered systems of support. Okay? And this is a framework of student-centered interventions and services that educators can use based on student data analysis. And the purpose of multi-tiered systems of support is to increase student achievement and to reduce disciplinary infractions in the school or in your program. And so it's a 3-tiered system. Tier 1 is that bottom tier in this pyramid, and this really is going to serve about 75 to 90% of your students, right? And this is really how we universally support and provide instruction and learning, all kinds of learning to our students. So in the area of academics, this looks like multimodal teaching strategies. This looks like differentiated instruction. This looks like using developmentally appropriate practices. It looks like using evidence-based practices, right? It's all of the things that we know are good, that we know we should be doing in our programs in the area of academics. In the area of behavior, it looks like just having program-wide rules that are consistent, that everybody knows what they are, where it means working on your program climate and culture and having a system for how behaviors are managed. In the area of social emotional development, it looks like having everybody understand your core competencies and skills that students should be developing around them, right? It's all of those pieces. The second tier is that middle group in the pyramid, and this is the targeted group intervention. So this is, think about 10 to 25% of your students need some kind of targeted intervention. And so some strategies that you may be using in this tier could include using small groups, right? Having small group tutoring, small group homework help. It could look like a specific enrichment activity for some students. It could look like using a curriculum product that you partnered with the school day to access. In the area of behaviors, it could mean that you do a check-in, check-out with some of your students just to see how they are, where they're at as they enter the day, and help them get settled as they transition perhaps from the school day into your program. It could mean social skills lessons for some of your students. It can look like really a wide variety of things. And then tier 3 are these individualized interventions. They're very specific, and they're going to serve less than 10% of your population. And so strategies may include explicit individualized support for a student. Like in the area of academics, it may mean sitting down and doing a lesson with one student. It could mean health or home services. It may mean a referral for counseling. It could mean support services for the family, right? And so this multi-tiered system of support is something that we say there's different students with different needs, and they get a different level of care. And my guess is, because you work in out of school time, this is why you do out of school time, because you have the freedom to invest in those students who need it most in the ways that are valuable. Because whenever I go and talk to out of school time professionals, that's what I hear from them. That's what we love about out of school time. We're not in the same box that we may be during the school day. And so multi-tiered systems of support can look somewhat different than during the school day, but it's something that you can do if you're not already doing. During the school day, it's a very formalized process. But in out of school time, it can look like things like, so that level 1, that base area on our pyramid is homework time. It's the enrichment activities. It's the things we're already doing in our out of school time programming. It looks like providing physical fitness opportunities for everybody, right? It's the general activities that we're doing that support our students' learning and growth physically, social, emotionally, and academically. The second level may be more explicit help and support. So it may be, instead of just having time set aside where we create an environment for homework, I told you I'm picking on homework today. It may be additional homework help for some students. They may need more support in your program. Or it may be an SEL club specifically for some students who are having a hard time managing their emotions. And then that level 3 support may be one-on-one tutoring. It may be support from a social worker who comes to your program and works with you and with your students. And then MTSS can also be part of a partnership with the school. And so it can also look like this, where level 1 is your typical school day program. Students go to math, they go to lunch, they go to language, arts, and literacy. And then in some spaces and places, your out of school time program, whatever it is that second level of support. It's in collaboration with the school day. We work with students who are struggling to get their homework done, or we provide physical fitness and health and wellness opportunities for students who are having not active enough during the school day, or who need opportunities to develop their social emotional skills and aren't getting those opportunities. And then perhaps if you're partnering with the school day in this manner, then that level 3 is really that special education program where students are getting the highest level of resources and supports. And so MTSS can look like either of these. It can look like within your own program, or it can look like a partnership with the school day where you've worked to align and your out of school time program is filling that gap, right? There's the gap again. I hope you're starting to see how all of these pieces are connected as they're integrating, as they're coming together. And so as you think about MTSS, I think one of the things that I want to encourage you to think about is, what supports do your students need, and are you already offering? And then does everybody on your team know about it? Because one of the things that I tend to see in out of school time programs is that some people on the team have a picture of, okay, here are the supports that I can offer students, and here is how I build them up based on their needs. But it's not always something that gets offered to every student, because there's not always that open conversation about, this is what my students really, really need, right? This is what this student's struggling with, what resources are there? And so it may mean that you're taking the time to build out your multi-tiered system support is doing that. And so I'll ask you to think about this. There in the chat box, or if you're wanting to use your annotation tool, you can do that as well. What are some supports that you're providing in tier 1 and tier 2 that you're already using in your program? What are some tier 1, tier 2 supports that you're already using in your program? I'll tell you a little bit about so we've got some homework help. That may be a tier 2 support, right? Those ones who need extra help. Don't forget, training can be part of multi-tiers and needs to be part of multi-tiered systems and support. Drop everything and read, right? A great tier 1 support, everybody's going to practice reading, right? Everybody's going to be part of it. Then we've got that small group homework support that kind of fits in that tier 2. So we're getting to the real needs of what we need in our students. We've got some social emotional learning curriculum that falls into both tier 1 and tier 2, where they get what they need. Everybody's getting those hands-on activities with math and science, right? We're leaning into that. I've got quarterly parent workshops for family growth and support, as well as some STEAM activities, right? Those quarterly workshops, right, are just that tier 1. That's what we want to invest in families, that we want to support in families. We've got some STEAM activities for them, right? We've got tutoring during the school day and connecting with the teachers in that. Home visits, depending on how you do them, can be tier 1, 2, 3. I know programs that visit every family, right? Tier 1, that's what we do. Tier 2, maybe we've targeted some families who have additional needs, or maybe it's tier 3. Like, it's like, okay, we're really having an issue. Let's see how we can connect with that. It could fit into any of those spaces. Parent events, just those regular ongoing parent events, are ways that we support what our students are, how they're learning, how they're growing, how they're addressing. So Donna, I think, answered the question about the home visits when it's happening. So if there's absenteeism, so that's probably like a tier 2 support, right? We're targeting those students who are having high levels of absenteeism in that process. We've got some homework support, physical activities, social, emotional, curriculum, family support. You've got it, right? You see how the tier 1, tier 2 is that what we're doing for everybody, what we're doing to support those who need it more. And so for tier 3, think about things like you may need different activities from their peers, right? I had a program where we had opportunities for students who had pretty serious special needs, who may be nonverbal in the classroom, or who may have some significant developmental delays. And so we needed different activities for them. They needed different support. Some of them needed one-on-one support from someone to be able to function in our programs, right? Some students may need regular meetings with a counselor or social worker if you have that kind of support options for your program. Some students may need some foreshadowing about what's going to happen next, exactly what it looks like, right? And creating that space. Charlene, I love that that idea around like these parent meetings where there's no kids, and giving parents a space to vent, to express what's going on with them. When I had a program where we ran something called Mom's Cafe, and we tried to create that space for moms before they picked up their kids. We'd be like, just come hang out, have a cup of coffee, sit and talk with other parents. And I think that that's such an important space and place for parents to have other adults to talk to, because so many of them go from work to kids and work to kids and work to kids. So as we wrap up our time together today, because I really only have like 30 seconds left, I want to share with you the evaluation and planning tool that you can use as you think about your program. And so as you go home, this tool is designed to give you some background information that you can use as you think about what you're doing with your students. Some questions for you to ask yourself, to ask your team. This is an important piece of the process. So don't go back and just say, okay, now I know what these things are. Evaluate your program and say, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm doing well. This is where I want to target my improvement. And so we would love to hear that from you. And we would say thank you all for joining us together today. I just want to pass the conversation back to Shanika, but feel free to drop any questions in the chat if you would like to.
Awesome. That was fantastic, Hillary. Thank you so much for sharing all of these great resources. Thank you, Donna. I believe Donna also shared a great toolkit that everyone can use. I always like opportunities like these webinars, because we get an opportunity to learn more, of course, about our industry, but also share and collaborate anything that is working for us. So thank you everyone for participating. What I'll do is I'll go ahead and drop a link for you to take a brief survey about our session. Let us know how we did. That link is in the chat. Thank you so much again, Hillary, for joining us today and demystifying all of these terminologies. A certificate of attendance will be sent out within a week to all of those who attended live. We hope you'll join us for our next session on launching STEM graffiti walls with Yana List, who is also an education specialist at Foundations. This will happen September 13th at 1 p.m. But thank you all so much for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day.